And this leads us to 7th grade. Now, the 13-year-old wants to get out in the world. They want to forget about everything that they've known, leave mom and dad behind. They want to get out and see what's going on and what's really happening in the world. And what better represents this than the Renaissance? The Renaissance, obviously, is this time when boundaries are being broken by scientists, by artists, by explorers, by religious figures all over Europe, trying to really look for what is truth and what is real in the world, and casting off old ideas to find what really exists in the world. The great scientists taking laws that had just been taken at face value and as de facto real, and saying, well, let's do some experiments. Let's find out what really is true. The explorers going out and breaking the bounds of what was believed about the world. And part of what we do to prepare for that European exploration in the 7th grade is first study the cultures of the world, so that when the children come to see what happens when the Europeans explore the world, they know what it is that the Europeans are moving into. Also, you have things like the Reformation, where Martin Luther declares that what is being taught by the Catholic Church is wrong, and this is not how we should be worshiping, and that worshiping really should be directly between the person and God, and not so much through these intermediaries of the church. And the radical breakup of the Catholic Church, which had for hundreds of years controlled and codified Europe. So this is the picture of the 7th grader out into the world, just, leave everything behind. In 8th grade, we finally come to the age of revolution. Now, if you've ever spent time with a 14-year-old, you would recognize that this is a perfect thing for them. The 14-year-old wants to make his or her own rules, and wants to leave behind the rules of the family, the rules of the school, and do what they want. And obviously, anybody who tells them differently is wrong and doesn't understand them, and all of these wonderful things. So we go through many, many different forms of revolution: the Industrial Revolution, the French Revolution, the Russian Revolution, the American Revolution, the Civil Rights Movement, and many more. But all of these are really taking into the children's consciousness, how do people break the ties that bind them? And how do they start to search for truth and try to create a society that is just and fair for others? Eventually, this leads them right up to modern history, and they will go, they'll learn about the modern political system and how we have come to the place where we are in terms of our governance in this country and around the world. So in this span of 8 years, the children have gone from this very dreamy consciousness of early childhood to full wakefulness in 8th grade, and they've done it through mythology and stories and pictures that really give them something that they can imagine at all times, that it's something that they're constantly having to picture in their own mind. And this is one of the things that Rudolf Steiner said was so crucial for our time now. And that is that we need to be able to take our ideals, we need to be able to imagine things and then bring them into the world. Now, how do we do that in the Waldorf School? Well, one of the things that's unique about the Waldorf schools is that we don't use textbooks, that the children actually create their own textbooks. We call them main lesson books. And these main lesson books are detailed collection of everything that they have learned through their 8 years. In 1st grade, they'll begin by drawing pictures that come out of the fairy tales, and in those pictures will be hidden the letters that will begin their process into reading. And each year when they hear stories, first of all, they'll copy those stories down into their main lesson books, they'll draw pictures, they'll sing songs, they'll do all of these many, many different things to bring to life the things that they're studying. As they move up into the grades, they start to write their own versions of the stories. What do they remember out of the story? What were the parts of the story that really spoke to them? And they'll create their own compositions out of that. As they move up into 6th, 7th, and 8th grade, they're adding things like science. They'll be writing down the experiments that they did in science. Again, illustrating them beautifully, writing up their own conclusions, and taking it in a much deeper way than it would be if they were just taking it out of a textbook. Beyond the main lessons, children in the Waldorf School will have subject teachers come and teach 45-minute lessons for the remainder of the day. Each child begins in 1st grade with 2 foreign languages, German and Spanish. They'll also have music, handwork, and PE. As they move up in the grades, in 4th grade they'll take on a stringed instrument. Every child in the school does it, and it's just part of what we do. They'll also, in 5th grade, start with chorus and practical arts. And in the practical arts, they'll begin working with clay and then work with wood for 6th, 7th, and 8th grade, and eventually moving into furniture. Again, the things that they're asked to do are not only beautiful, but practical and functional. And this is, again, training the will of the child to do things that are useful in the world. Having set the foundation in the early childhood, working strongly with the senses, developing a good imagination and strong will qualities, and then through the lower school years of setting a foundation of a strong feeling life and emotional life, the children are now ready in the high school to take on intensive academic work. Perhaps the best way to trace a picture of the development of high school students is by looking at the literature that is studied in the high school. Now, in 9th grade, children have reached a point in puberty where they feel fairly secure in themselves, but you often see around the age of 14 or 15 that children are on an incredible emotional roller coaster. One minute they're very focused and determined, the next minute they're dreamy and rather spaced out. Other times they might be rather giddy and silly, and a few minutes later they might be rather depressed and sullen. These changes in emotion ride very much like a roller coaster, and the children themselves don't even often notice the extremes that they go through within a short period of time, but those around them, these swings are very obvious. So in the 9th grade, we look at comedy and tragedy, particularly looking at Greek tragedy, Shakespearean comedy, and moving up into modern theatrical works. And this does 3 things. Not only does it trace these developments in the way that human consciousness evolves, but also shows the physical development of the theater, from the ancient Greek theater, which was a very simple production, to perhaps the Globe Theater in Shakespeare's time, to a modern theatrical performance, which is really very much performed in a black box where all of the action has to come out of the actors themselves. The study in comedy and tragedy really reflects the polarities that these children go through in their emotional life. And so by delving deeply into what are the aspects of tragedy, what is it that makes for a real tragedy and can bring out that type of emotion in a human being, what is it that actually brings about comedy and laughter and humor? What are the elements that need to be included there? In studying these in an external way, in the Greek plays, the Shakespearean plays, and the modern plays, they're actually having an opportunity to look at themselves at the stage of development where they are without having to be too self-focused.